Hello, and welcome to the training on supporting EAL pupils in upper primary and secondary. My name is Alison Roy, and I'm one of the two EAL teachers in Highland. My colleague is Jenny Gray. Both our contacts that are on the slides. So for this training, you will have to have the set of slides which are on the link beside the training, open on a separate tab, and all the activities that we will be doing, the links will be on the slides for you to access. Okay, for the training today, we're going to cover the following. So first of all, just looking a little bit about your own experience and knowledge of working with the EAL learners. We're going to do that in the form of a quiz. We'll then move on to look at the EAL profiles, which hopefully you've come across in your schools, and how we assess the language levels, English language levels of our EAL pupils. You'll then have a language experience, get a chance to kind of have a sense of how our pupils may feel when they first start their new school and their English skills are still in the initial stages. And moving on from that, looking at new to English strategies and how to differentiate within the classroom. This training is particularly aimed at the upper primary and the secondary, where pupils have their own Chromebooks. So we're very much going to look at how technology can support EL learners and the tools that are available to them. Lastly, but certainly not least, we will look a little bit at some of the additional pressures and challenges that refugee pupils have to contend with, and also how celebrating home languages has a positive impact for our EL learners. Okay, so first of all, we're going to do the quiz. So if you'd like to pause in a minute to pause this recording and just to click on the EL quiz link, which will take you to a Google form. If you can fill that in and then click submit, you'll then see the answers and get a chance to see how you get on. When you've done the quiz, I'd like you to have a wee little think about before we come back on what questions, what answers surprised you, and just, whether it's altered maybe some of your perceptions or knowledge about how EL learners learn and the length of time it takes them to acquire English to the level of fluency. Okay, welcome back, and I hope you enjoyed the quiz. So maybe some of the answers that might have surprised you, and certainly sometimes, are not an obvious thought for people, is the amount of time it takes an EL pupil to become fluent. So the 5 to 7 years is very much to achieve fluency at their cognitive level in that second or additional language. And this is maybe also to acquire the level of vocabulary and structures that are needed to achieve in an academic setting at school. So 1 to 2 years, a lot of pupils achieve the social language. They can chat to their friends, sound quite fluent, but they may very much underperform in kind of more formal assessments, until they have been in the school setting, that 5 to 7 years. And that's obviously talking about pupils that come into school, an English speaking medium school, where they are new to English at the beginning. Obviously, the very much importance of maintaining home language, and we can't stress that enough for a number of reasons, some of which you saw in the quiz, just to maintain good communication levels with family, with extended family that may still live in their home country. We want children to be equally bilingual, so not to acquire English at the expense of their home language. That will be a benefit for them in later life. There's cognitive benefits to knowing two languages. So a whole plethora of reasons why we really want to maintain the home language, and to stress to parents that the way to do that is to continue to speak and read with their children in the home language. Many of you might experience that some EL pupils when they're new, sometimes younger pupils, though it can happen through the stages of primary and secondary, that they will often go through a silent period. And sometimes that can cause concern for staff, but that is quite a normal period to go through. And, it will happen for some students, not all, where they're taking in the language, they're thinking about how it works, but don't yet have the confidence to actually start using their voice in that new language. But very much learning is still going on in that period. if this period becomes extended, it might be worth seeking some more support from ourselves to see if there is another, barrier for the pupils in using English within the school setting. But it is a very normal period to go through. So from that 5 to 7 years, we've kind of got a visual representation of how that the pupils, EL pupils coming in new to English will progress through different stages to achieve fluency, where they'll achieve their potential across the curriculum at their cognitive level. So the first stage, obviously, I've spoken about new to English, which pupils have been living in another country often, being educated in their home language and speaking their home language at home, obviously, then coming to an English-speaking country, a school, and they're very much new to English, and they'll start to acquire individual words, start to kind of understand simple language, instructional language, common everyday terms. And then maybe from about 6 months to 18 months, they'll move from that stage one new to English to early acquisition, where they start speaking in short sentences, still with some inaccuracies, but be able to communicate a little bit more, increasing their everyday basic language vocabulary, to be able to say a little bit more, express themselves, and towards the end of that stage two, moving to speak in different tenses. So generally, students will start to communicate in the present tense and move to be able to speak about the past and the future. As we move into developing competence, they will use a greater range of structures, sentences will become longer, vocabulary will move from just that everyday, more basic vocabulary into more descriptive words that they can use to describe, to explain. And again, with increasing accuracy as they move towards competent, where again, the lengthening of sentences accuracy will increase, where they're able to show these skills most of the time in the curriculum. And then fluency is when that pupil is achieving as they would have done in their home language. They're achieving their potential at their cognitive level in that second language. So the EL profiles, all pupils, EL pupils should have an EL profile. These are now set up by schools and should be shared with staff. They're all stored in the EL profiles library on SharePoint. And as they can see an example there it's a slightly new style of EL profile of competence, which takes the people from primary right through to the end of secondary. It's all in the one document. You may have some older versions in your EL profiles library, which are fine. We don't want you to move them on to the new style, but if you're setting one up for the first time, you would use the new style of profile. So obviously the profile provides information on the language background, which is very important to know what languages the pupil speaks at home. They may speak two different languages. They might speak one language with dad, different language with mum. They have other languages with their grandparents. So to get that overall language background, if they first start, we wouldn't expect the level of English to be assessed immediately. But as they're in the school for a few weeks, then to have a level of English recorded as we're going back, looking at the staircase again to one of these language levels recorded on the EL profile. And then on the profile, there are also links to resources that will support the pupil at the stage they're at. Now, we asked, so we're really focusing on this training a little bit on pupils that are new to English and that are coming into school having not been exposed to a lot of English in their previous educational experience. So we asked a number of pupils what helped. And just maybe before I put up what some of these pupils said, have a little think about what you think might have helped these pupils. So somebody said, obviously, pupils in the class that speak the same language as themselves. Important one, the teachers were friendly, and that goes a long way just so if teachers are able to say hello in the corridor, give a smile, particularly when pupils are very, very new, that they get the sense that people are keen to communicate with them and they show a friendly face. People's talking about how difficult it was in the earlier stages. It helps if teachers try and explain in simple words. So not using pidgin English, but just trying to reduce the amount of language they're using and trying to make the instructions easy to understand. Obviously, the technology helps. I think as we can see that pupils that have the Chromebooks, that's been a huge improvement and benefit for our EAL pupils in being able to communicate in those early stages. And certainly, buddy system is invaluable in terms of students getting to know some of their peers and having that support from their peers in earlier stages. We're going to now listen to one pupil just talking about what helped him when he came to his new school and just to give us an overview of what are the important things for the pupils when they first come into their new environment. Okay, so a lot of things in there, but obviously just have an understanding of the amount of differences and the stress that students will feel in these initial days when everything is so different. The language, obviously, first and foremost, but just all the environment is very different to what they're used to. Okay, now we're now going to look a little bit at a language experience. So on the note of being aware of how students coming in new to school, there's so many differences, so many things they have to try and understand and access in this new environment. We're just going to give you a little feel of how that might feel listening to a language which you don't understand or you understand very little of, and just also like I'll give you two language experiences. The first one not being less supportive, and the second one hopefully giving us an idea of some of the strategies that can be put in place to allow students to access a large part of the curriculum, even though it is in a new language for them. So I hope if people that are Spanish speakers, this might not be such an experience, but for those of you that don't have, are not fluent or have a good level of Spanish, then just sit back. And I want you to think about how this made you feel. Imagining if you're in a classroom and you're presented with a lesson like this. Buenos días. Bueno, hoy vamos a aprender de fotosíntesis, que es el proceso en cual las plantas fabrican su propio alimento. Vamos al principio, vamos a escuchar un vídeo, le vamos a contestar unas preguntas en un documento y luego cuando hemos hecho todo eso, vamos a entregar en Classroom. Espero que ya sabes algo porque has aprendido el año pasado y ya sabes algo de este proceso. Okay. So just before you move on, I want you just a little think about how that made you feel. And obviously that was very unsupportive. We hope that teachers wouldn't replicate that type of teaching in a classroom, and there'd always be more strategies in place to make it accessible to all learners, not just EAL pupils, rather than just the voice, you hearing a voice with no visuals. Okay, so now I'm going to do a similar, you might have guessed that the lesson was about photosynthesis. So I'm now going to do that lesson again, a little bit the introduction with the support of some visuals, as you can see there. Okay, hoy vamos a hablar de fotosíntesis. Ese es el proceso en cual las plantas fabrican, hacen su propio alimento, su comida. Ok, es un proceso que igual conoces. A través de la raíz, las raíces, la planta absorbe del suelo agua y sales minerales. Agua y sales minerales. Esas se juntan y se llama savia bruta. La savia bruta sube por los vasos lanosos hasta las hojas. Aquí están las hojas del árbol, las hojas verdes. Las hojas toman del aire un gas, dióxido de carbono. Este gas se mezcla con la savia bruta y con la ayuda de la luz del sol se transforma en el alimento de la planta savia elaborada. En este proceso, la planta expulsa oxígeno. La savia elaborada se reparte por todas las plantas a través de los vasos liberanos. Okay, so lot more support there, and I think with you can have a little think about that, but obviously the obvious being visuals. A labeled diagram goes a long way to supporting a pupil, just having the labels. For them to actually have the text in front of them, even, this time I actually read more or less what that text said, but to have a text there that they've got time, or even in digital form, they've got time to look at it, to maybe translate some of the words into their own language. The color used in the text, the keywords are highlighted in green. Lots of things there that is much more accessible than obviously just hearing instructions or part of a lesson given with no visuals and no links to kind of hang it on. I hopefully the second time I spoke more slowly, repeated certain key terms, certain words like agua for water, just so that students can pick up some of this everyday vocabulary, although this is an academic lesson about a particular process. Okay, so maybe just thinking what could have helped more, and something that there are a lot of our students do use and find very useful is a glossary. So you can see here the keywords. Obviously we were kind of doing it the opposite round, where the language used was Spanish, translate it into English. So you would be able to make up or maybe access a glossary, or students can create their own glossary at the back of a jotter where you give them the keywords in English, they translate them into their home language. Very important not just to have names of things, but also to give key verbs, because that allows students to actually talk about a process. You can see there you've got the verbs, but also you've got some sentence starters, so that a student with support, with given maybe some scaffolding, could actually say a couple of sentences about the process they have learned about. And to be aware that for some learning, depending on the age and the experience of the pupil in front of you, they may have learned about this process in their first school, in their home country, but they may not have. And some of our pupils will have gaps in education, may have not been to education at all. So it's to be aware of almost what is the starting point. If they know about the process, as we probably did, then that makes it a lot more easier to understand, even in a different language. If it's new, which it may be in some, for example, in a history class, if you're doing a bit of Scottish history, then just to have an awareness of this, and that there's an additional learning that needs to additional scaffolding and support needs to be put in place for the student to gain some understanding of that subject. Okay. Going on for that in terms of vocabulary. So obviously vocabulary is key. And this is not, this diagram is not just aimed at EAL pupils, but just an awareness of the types of words really that we all deal with and that children learn and expand on, particularly upper primary through to secondary. So obviously tier 1 is the kind of everyday speech, so everyday language that students will normally learn first, and EAL pupils are the same in that, learn these basic words, whether it's colours, names of things, lots of nouns, lots of basic words that they will learn when they first come to school. Then if we kind of move up to the top one, the academic vocabulary, the subject-specific vocabulary, for example, photosynthesis, a lot of the students, and depending from what their home language is, but a lot of the students may know these words in their home language, particularly if they've been in education and done these subjects before. And it's quite easy, it's relatively easy to translate or transfer, I should say, that word into a new language because it's the word has a meaning and they've learned it at school and they can just transfer that in. What can be more tricky is these words that we need that sometimes cut across different subjects, often are used in exam type questions. And depending how they're used, they may have different meanings in different subjects, as the examples I've given there: examine, authority, establish. So sometimes these kind of almost, they're not connecting words, but they're words that we need to be able to explain or talk about a process, to understand questions. They can be the more tricky ones for our EL pupils to learn. Now, so we've talked about a glossary, and there are a number of kind of easy strategies, let's say, that students can use themselves in classes, teachers can use, support staff to help to make the curriculum and the lesson more accessible to a pupil, a new EL pupil that is quite new to English. So just maybe have a look if you want to pause and go on to the slides, or just pause the video for a minute and just have a think about what these strategies might, what these images might, what strategies they represent. Okay, so now just we'll go through them. So as we spoke about this before, and obviously that was mentioned by the pupil, by Zoran, in his when he was speaking about what helped him when he first came to school, was the kind of the friendliness of the teachers and the support staff. So if you get a chance and you're working with our pupils, try and engage them in everyday conversations. Initially, when they're still, particularly maybe when they're in secondary, it can be tricky to make initial contact with or make friendships, to establish relationships with their peers. So sometimes the most conversation they may have in these first weeks can be with a friendly adult. So it's important to try and create time to have these conversations. Okay, so we're going to move on in a little while to look more at technology. But if the student has a copy of slides or a copy of a text, then they can use the translation tools to translate on a text, a Google Docs or slides. They can copy and paste, they can annotate a docs or slides, so they've kind of got both language on the one page. So that's very handy for pupils to get copy of text. And even if they're, if it's possible to even have that prior to a class, particularly if they are keen for that to happen, they can actually look at it before they then meet it in the classroom situation. Okay, so we're saying give, just remember to give the instructions not just in the written form and verbally, and that can be vice versa, that also not just to give instructions sometimes verbally, but because depending on the literacy skills of your particular EL student, then they may be stronger in literacy than they can in terms of their comprehension at the beginning. So if it's in written form, they can translate it. But equally, we may have students where they're still acquiring literacy skills in English, so it's important to give the instructions verbally. And if possible, if there's a same language peer, just to check that the student has fully understood what they're required to do in the activity. Okay, as we've mentioned, in terms of the lesson on photosynthesis, visuals are key. And we, again, can't stress that more. And we'll look at some of the technology. We've got technology, we can Google search things at the touch of a button. So it's important to try, always provide a visual, and particularly at the beginning of a lesson, that the student, if they are new to English, we are very unlikely to understand the whole lesson, but to know the context of the lesson is key, and at least to be able to kind of make a start on what is being talked about in this particular lesson, to have a visual, make it very clear what is the content of your lesson. Okay, and we mentioned that before, having a buddy. So schools will often put a buddy system, hopefully, in place for for EL pupils that are new to the school. It's good to have a rotational system for a buddy because it maybe can feel maybe a little bit too intensive for the new pupil and for the buddy to always maybe be together in these first few weeks. So to have a kind of rotation where different pupils buddy maybe each week, but to make sure that people knows if they're moving around different classes where they need to go, they've got someone to sit beside at break, lunchtime, And this really needs to go on for more than just a week because it takes, it's still very new, lots of things to pick up. And often students can feel quite isolated in the first few months. So it's important that the buddy system is extended as long as the pupil needs it. Okay, differentiation. We're going to look a little bit at some of the, we have talked about some of the ways both the support staff and the teachers can differentiate in the class. We're going to look at some more things in terms of follow-up tasks that can be done, but it's very important that the language expected of new EAL to pupils is reduced down where they can show their understanding, but they're not expected to write or communicate in a lengthy way, which they wouldn't have the language to do at this stage. Glossaries were mentioned. Obviously, they can be same length. They can be English language glossaries where we might have a visual and a definition of the word, and also sort of glossaries in English and home language. And also just, when students are asked to read, highlighting is very, very positive strategy where students can find keywords in a text and just translate them into their own language, put that in the back of a jot or a table. But the actual process of highlighting, making that correlation between a word they've heard or a word they see written, and then finding it within other words within a text is very positive for students developing literacy skills in that new language. In terms of differentiation, these are a couple of strategies that can be used for follow-up tasks. I think in the photosynthesis, we mentioned labeling. Obviously, part of that lesson, there was a label diagram was used. A follow-up, very good follow-up is just to ask students to then label a diagram, either giving them the words to then sort onto the correct labels, or if they're a little bit further on, asking them to produce the language after they've had the input. Obviously, using a table, that table makes a huge difference. Just the fact it's laid out, there's a lot less language required to fill in. There's a kind of like a pattern to it. So again, using a table gives students a much clearer idea of the learning in a lesson rather than asking them to write something in a lengthy way, which would be difficult for them to writing a paragraph in terms of showing their understanding. Completing a table is much more effective. Gap fill is also another effective way. Students can be given some structures that they would find hard to reproduce themselves, but then they can fill in the missing words from a choice. Little bit similar to a table, we've got mind maps or graphic organizers and just different ways of presenting the information in a very clear and kind of visual way that makes it more accessible to an EL learner. Here we've got an example of a glossary, English, Polish, and a visual at the end, a picture in the third column. And these are really easy to make up, again, at the back of a jotter. If students are in different subjects, every subject, it would be a good idea to have create a glossary at the back of that jotter. Also, below the glossary, if you're working with a pupil, what's another kind of follow-up to the glossary is to give them some gap fills using the words that they've learned so they can see how these words, these new words in English, how they actually, the structure and what order they would come in a sentence. Something which again, hopefully happens a lot in schools is encouraging new EL pupils to work in pairs or groups and giving them a assigned role with supportive peers where they can hear, listen to positive or to a good role model speaking English and somebody that will include them in a task and also support them in that task in the early stages when they're maybe not able to take a lead in a group scenario. Okay, if people, so that was just a few key strategies. If you're interested in reading some more strategies, if you click on this takes you to our website. This takes you to the New to English website, and if you scroll down, you've got strategies for listening, talking, reading, and writing. Okay. Also, you've also got this. The Bell Foundation is also a great source for gives you a number of strategies. They also do a number of trainings. So they also have webinars on there and other information. They're sort of key sort of specialists for working with EL pupils in terms of the UK. Hey, now just, I mean, we've kind of touched on this, but I know just to have an awareness, and particularly maybe with many some of the pupils that you'll be working with currently, and how different, I suppose, scripts are from other countries. So children may come with literacy skills, but they may need additional support in transferring these literacy skills into English. And depending on, this very much dependent on how much school experience that pupil has had, if they've had any gaps in education, but it also can depend on how different their script is to English and how different the language is in terms of transferring these skills. So, it's just to be aware of that, and sometimes give even older students opportunities to practice handwriting, to practice reading aloud. Obviously, many scripts go from right to left, as opposed to left to right. And awareness of that, and just the differences and any similarities there are for students to build on. Many students find English sometimes tricky because we've not just got a one letter, one sound system, which some languages have. So obviously for some students that come from that type of language where each letter represents a single sound, then it can be quite complex, the number of sounds that, for example, the letter E can represent in English. So it's again awareness of differences in languages, just and how to kind of maybe like, if you're aware of these differences, then sometimes it's easier to explain to a student, how it works in English and for them to understand. Okay, so we're going to move on to look at using technology to support EL learners. We have a Padlet, which I will show you later, that all these Padlets are on our EL Highland website. So we're going to look at some different tools. The first one is Google Translate, and I'll go through a little bit the functions of Google Translate, both the website and the extension, and then give you an opportunity to pause the recording and try these tools out on if you're using a laptop or a Chromebook. If you're on a phone, you could also try some of them out, but they might just look a little bit different. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is the Google Translate website. So generally we would always say, so obviously students have the they have their Chromebooks. So generally we would say to students to bookmark the actual website. If they type in Google Translate, they often get a kind of more reduced version. So you want it to look like this. And I would get the students to bookmark it. So that's, they're easily accessible. It's on their bookmark bar. They also can add it as an app on the Chromebook, and both are good. It's maybe like personal preference, which one the student prefers. I think a lot of the students quite like just to have it bookmarked and they can just click in it, it'll pop up. So the different things that the website can do, it's got a microphone function. So if I speak in my poor Persian, salam halam chitori, and that's okay. So that translates obviously the spoken word. So for students, they can obviously speak in their home language and it can be translated into English. If they're not literate, that can be read out in English. This is unfortunately not that this function, the microphone and the read aloud function, is not available in every single language, unfortunately. So you'll need to check. And I'm going to show another tool, particularly for Persian. Also, Persian is one of the languages in Afghanistan. Also, normally, well, Persian is a generic name known as Farsi in Iran and Dari in Afghanistan, if you're searching for it. But on Google Translate, you look for Persian. Unfortunately, yeah, so that has the kind of microphone and the read aloud function in English. The other way around, it doesn't have the read aloud function in Dari. But I'm going to show you so if I change it just to say, yeah, hello, how are you? Yep, it doesn't, it will say it will write it in both the Persian and Persian script and in an English phonetics, but it doesn't read it aloud the other way around. Though I will go on to show you a different app that children can have on their Chromebooks that allows it to work both ways, the other way around in Persian and in Pashto, which are the two Afghan languages. Okay, so back to the functions of the website. So you've got the microphone, read aloud function for some languages. You can bring in images or documents. You can't bring in a Google Doc. You have to download it and it comes in as a Word doc, or the same for the slides. If you want to translate the whole of the slides, you have to download them, and they come in as a PowerPoint kind of, and then it translates it and you have to upload it again. So it's a wee bit of a faff for the kind of Google bringing into in terms of it going back into Google Classroom. But you can copy and paste from websites, obviously, into here, translate it, translate images. You can also copy and paste a web address in here and it will translate the whole website. So that's a handy function for anything. You can put a website, any website, and then you'll get the whole website translated, which can be very handy and useful for students that are very new to English. As they move on, we try to not encourage them to translate the whole website, but to translate more parts of it they're not sure about rather than translating everything. Okay, so that and the other thing on the is we've got, so if we go back to the text, we've also got keyboards. So obviously for where languages have a different script, you can, so if I've clicked there Persian, again, that's the same as Farsi and Dari. The students can then click on the on-screen keyboard to allow them to type in a language using the different script. What a lot of our students have done that write with a different script is we've actually been able to get stickers for their keyboards, and there is a way of adding an additional language onto their Chromebook, which I'm not going to talk about in this training, but we've got information on that on the Padlet, on our technology Padlet. So students can then rather than trying to click, point and click on a small keyboard, sorry, they can actually just type on the normal keyboard. They get little stickers that sit alongside the English letters and allow them to they can switch back and forth depending if they're inputting in English or in their own language. Okay, so the website's the first thing. And then the other tool that we've got with the Google Translate is the Google Translate extension. So I'm going to go into a class just to show you how that works. So you'll find the Google Translate extension up. If you go to the jigsaw, that's where all your extensions are. I think a little black jigsaw type piece. And if you don't see the Google Translate extension, you can pin it and then it will appear up in the top toolbar up here. So you can click on it and set the language extension options. I've got mine set to Pashto. So that just means it's going to translate into Pashto from English. And I've got a display icon that I can click to show pop up. So you can have an immediately display pop up, which means it will come straight away. So this one I have to click. So we save that. And then if we go on to a classroom, you can highlight more than one word, okay, and you'll see the Google Translate extension pop up. Click on it and you get the translation in the, another language, in this case, Pashto. For some of the languages, it allows you to copy and paste it back in, not for this one. And so the Google Translate extension works on Classroom. It also works on a website. So there, for example, if we can highlight a word there. So the BBC Biteside website, it will translate it. You could highlight a whole sentence and it will translate it. So it's very handy in the sense it's just there, it's quite quick. You can translate parts of what you're reading. If the student feels they need to translate the whole website, they either can cut and paste the website address up here back into the Google Translate website, or a quicker way, sorry, going back to the website, is they can do right click and it says it's actually got translate to Spanish, which I've got it set to. But if it comes up here, if you don't want to translate into Spanish, you can go here, choose another language, and you can change the Spanish, or you can leave it as Spanish and you can translate. Okay, as you see, it's translated into Spanish. If you want it back in English, just click the English. Obviously, if it's in a different script, sometimes you have to just remember the order if you want to go back and forward, but you can put it into a whole variety of languages. That's a very quick way, the right click, and it's, sorry, right click, translate. I think I've just go again. Yeah, translate to. and you translate into another language, the whole website. Okay, so if you'd like to, we'll go back to the slides, and if you'd like to pause the recording at the moment and take some time to look at the Google Translate website, okay, and play around with the different functions, the microphone, the read aloud, try translating a website, look at the alternative keyboard that you can have pop up for some languages. Think about some of the students you have and use some of their languages. And then go on to any website or a classroom and see if you can set your Google Translate extension to a language using extension options and try it out on there, the Google Translate extension. Okay, right. The next tool, I hope you managed to get both of these working or had a chance to kind of try them out on the device you're using. The only so I suppose obviously for the Chromebooks, when students are doing the right click, they need to do the kind of two fingers on the pad, which sometimes the students can find a little bit tricky. A mouse can be easier, but it's just slightly different for the rather than the right click. So for next, we're going to look at is Google Lens, which is a great tool that the students can use on their Chromebooks. And this allows translation, a bit like a snipping kind of tool where you can highlight an area and it will translate just the part you've highlighted in a kind of separate box on the right-hand side. It can be used, unlike the extension, which is only can be used on Classroom and a web page, the Google Lens can be used in slides, Google Docs, PDFs, a whole, across the board on any of the applications you're going to be using. So I'll just come out of the presentation to, let's see. Okay, just to let you look at how this works. So again, like let's just get another document up. So like the Google Translate extension, it sits up here on the bar. So search with Google Lens. You can also, if you don't see it up there, you can right click and it will say search with Google Lens. It's for the Chromebook, it says search with Google. So if we click on that, so obviously I've got mine up here, so I can click on that and then it just comes like a snipping tool. You highlight it, okay, and then it just takes a few minutes. You come up with the option translate. Okay, and it translates. Mine is set to Pashto, but you can set it to a different language and it translates at the side. So in the case of Pashto, it's given it in the script. It's also given it in the kind of like an English phonetic version of what it says. So the students can then copy and paste that back into a document, or if it's on slides, they can insert it into a text box and have it sitting alongside the slides that they have in English. For example, if we did it here on a slide, so let's say just do the snipping tool again, you could translate something, have it done, then you could copy and paste it and do another, insert a text box and have that sitting alongside the English version. So it's really handy. It's very, well, in saying that, it is very quick. It is a little bit slower in a Chromebook and there's a little bit of a delay before it appears on the right-hand side and you kind of get the option translate. So again, I'm going to give you a chance to try this out. If you're on a Chromebook, try it out in the Chromebook there. If you're on a laptop, you'll see it the right click, translate, just do it again. So right click. So if we go off that, let's see. On here. Okay, so right click and it says search with Google Lens. Okay, so I'll pause if you pause the recording again, and we'll just take a little bit of time to try the Google Lens tool. Okay, well, I hope people find that useful. I mean, as I said, it can be a little bit slow in a Chromebook, but I think the benefit of using Google Lens is it operates across all the applications. Otherwise, students are sometimes using something for Google Docs, something different for slides, and the extension is great, the one that you used before, but it is limited to more websites and Classroom. Now, I mentioned earlier that Microsoft, no, sorry, that Google Translate, the website, doesn't read aloud in Dari or Pashto, doesn't read the translation aloud. So the only in Microsoft Translator is another translating app, which we can add to laptops, to school laptops, but you can obviously, if you've got a phone, you can add it as an app on your phone, and the pupils can add it as an app on the Chromebooks. So a lot of our Afghan pupils have done that, and that allows a member of staff or a peer to speak in English, and it can be read out to them in Dari or Pashto, Dari being the same as Persian. So this has been a huge benefit for our pupils where they've not got a degree of literacy in their home language. So they're not able to read the translation in Pashto or Dari, but they can listen to it. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a one-way conversation because it doesn't allow for Pashto, the students, to speak in. They can speak in Persian on the Google Translate. So it's a wee bit using two things to kind of have a proper conversation. But just to mention that, and if you're working with pupils where they don't have the option, the read aloud option in their language, to try the Microsoft Translator on their Chromebooks and see if it's offered there. Okay, the other tools that I'd like to look at just before we move on is Read and Write for Google Chrome. So this is not, these tools are not specifically for EAL pupils, but they have got many functions that really benefit our EAL pupils. Many of you might be familiar with Read and Write for Google Chrome and supporting students with their literacy. So we're just going to look at a couple of the functions that are particularly useful for EAL pupils. So I'll go on to, if we go into this, we'll go into a website, and if, hopefully people will see the RW and the purple jigsaw up at the top. If you can't see it, go back to the kind of black jigsaw and see that it's pinned, and then you should see it up to the right of your toolbar. So click on link and you'll get this toolbar that sits across the top of your document. So again, Read and Write for Chrome can be used with a web page, a Google Doc, Google Slides, PDF, which is opened in Orbit Note, but it can sit across the top of all these applications. Again, like the Google Lens, the benefit of it is it's kind of more universal. It's not just restricted to certain applications. So one of the things, obviously, and it's a real benefit for EL pupils and other pupils who might need some support with their reading and their literacy skills, is to be able to highlight a text and then use the black triangle is the read aloud function. Okay, now just actually going back a couple of steps, what I will show you is the three dots is the settings for Read and Write. So the main one to go to speech, and you will select the person who's speaking in English. So we've got Scottish Fiona. You can change the speed of how they read and the translation. There's a translation function in Read and Write, so set it to the language you want it to be translated into. Okay, so the read aloud function is the black triangle. Also, great function within Read and Write that sometimes people are not always aware of is the picture dictionary. And it might sound maybe for some of our older students a little bit babyish, let's say, but actually the amount of pictures is much wider than just basic everyday vocabulary. So a lot of subject-specific vocabulary is in the picture dictionary. For example, the word rural. So if we highlight it, click on picture dictionary, we get a picture. Okay, same for, let's say, we've got population. I think that's it, yeah, population. Highlight the word and click on the picture dictionary. Okay, and we'll get an image. So again, when pupils, are acquiring, maybe at, the beginning, they're very keen to translate, if they have literacy, translate into the home language. But for some students that either don't have literacy or else want to kind of gain an understanding more in English and not always go to translation first, using the picture dictionary gives that kind of like quick image as within, as they're reading the text. So actually the translation option is here just to show that. So I have to select a word. The slight disadvantage of this translation option is it only translates single words. So it is more limited than either the Google Translate website, which we can copy and paste into, or the Google Translate extension, which in this case, you can see the extension clicking up, because you can highlight more than one word and you've got the Google Translate extension. But again, the advantage of this translation option is it sits within the read and write bar, which can be put on any application. In terms of supporting students with their writing, and we can use two functions. We've got the speech to text, so you can click on this microphone here. Today I am going to the shops. Today I am going to the shops. Oh, it did work that time. Okay, so you've got the speech to text. You've also got the predictive text, which is up in the kind of cloud. It looks a bit like a cloudy speech bubble. So again, support with writing. The man is, just to give support of what might be, is the tall. Okay. Tallest. Okay. Oops, I don't think that's come up. Tallest man in. Yeah, as you can see, so words will come up. You can set it for the amount of options that come up. So I think this one's set to, is it 10? But then you can make it smaller in terms of the words. You can also set it to read as you type in, so it kind of reads it back to the student. So you've got the kind of speech to text, and you've also got the predictive text. Sometimes for students that are really new to English, the speech to text can be a little bit more tricky if they're still acquiring the sounds of English, that it might not pick up different pronunciation or accents. But it's definitely a tool that can be used. Okay, so with read and write, I would like you to pause the video just in a minute and have a go at using some of the tools there within Google Read and Write. So look at the read aloud, picture dictionary, translation tools. We haven't looked at today highlighting words and vocabulary lists, but this is another thing that Google Read and Write can do. And if you also want to look at the predictive text and the speech to text. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Just to have a bit of time to spend looking at these tools and getting an idea of how they would work for the students you work with. If you have any queries about any of the tools, please get in touch. I mean, we're not technology experts, but we try and kind of find an answer, to your questions about the technology. And if we don't know, we certainly can ask some people that are very good on Google to help us with help us with any of the queries. Okay, so we're kind of coming towards the end of our presentation, but just a wee look. So all the information that I've spoken about today is on digital tools for EAL learners. So this is a Padlet we've developed, which is on our website. So if I click on that, that takes you to the website, and you've then got so I'll just wait till it loads. You've got the Padlet there on the website, okay, and that will give you information on all the tools we've spoken about. It also gives you information which we haven't talked about today in the presentation, how to set up a Chromebook for a new EL pupil. Okay, now one of the other things we did touch on, I think, in our quiz, was just the importance of home language. And although we hope that parents will maintain that home language, and certainly speak it to the children, and hopefully even develop support the children developing literacy skills or continuing their literacy skills in their home language. Anything we can do as staff working with the pupils is really beneficial just to celebrate the fact that they speak another language and they have a lot of knowledge and culture to bring to the school in that language and from their prior learning. So again, I would encourage you to, and just once I finish, just to pause the video and to click on some of these links of things you can do to sort of celebrate the home language within a school setting. So obviously there's signage, there's particular days where schools can do activities to really celebrate languages. There are websites that have books. This one, Unite, is more aimed at younger learners. These are books in English and other languages that students, some are read aloud and some are for students to read themselves, where students who have literacy in their home language can read a book, maybe during reading for enjoyment time, when they're not, if they would, well, to enjoy a book in their own language, but also if they don't have the English level of comprehension or literacy to enjoy a book at that level in English. YouTube's a great source of, popular stories in other languages that you can maybe let the student listen to. It's lovely maybe for a class to also listen to a short story in another language, have a sense of what the other language sounds like. And the library have access to some texts in other languages. We've got one here, Harry Potter in Polish. So it's always worth asking, for the language that your students speak to see if you can get texts in their language. The school library can source something, or the local library can maybe get something in that they can read a story in their own language. So again, a suggestion, just take a minute just to pause the video and have a look at each of these websites that have got the links on them and to see if they would be, you could see a way of using them in your school. Right, moving on. Now this is particularly for people who are at secondary, something called ESOL. So ESOL stands for English Speakers of Other Languages, and generally we use it in Scotland to refer to the SQA qualifications. You might hear people talking about ESOL interchangeably with EAL, in terms of if students are getting support, they're getting ESOL support. But generally, we use ESOL to talk about the qualifications that students might do at secondary school in English for speakers of other languages. So the qualifications are there from N2 to higher. And some students, when they're coming in newer to English, might sit some of the lower levels. And then with the National 5 and higher stage for students that maybe wouldn't be able to achieve at their level or their cognitive level, National 5 or higher English, they may opt with, or the school might take the decision that ESOL would suit that student better and they're more likely to achieve better, to get a better qualification or for entry into further higher education, taking ESOL rather than mainstream English, a National 5 and higher level. The ESOL levels link to something called the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. So if people have come across these numbers, higher ESOL equals C1, National 5 equals B2. Again, if they're new, sometimes if you're looking for resources and you're teaching ESOL with students at secondary level, many websites will categorize their resources A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. So sometimes it's worth, if you know the level, you can then search for resources at that level. Now, these are two packs which we've developed, which are particularly aimed at students when they first come into the school as new arrivals and new to English. So they take students through common everyday themes to learn that basic everyday language, survival vocabulary, to acquire the basic structures to begin to communicate in English. So again, the links are on here, and I'm just going to open up the primary one, but I suggest, like, once we look at this, that you take a bit of time to go through it. So I'll just let that load. So again, it's all organized in themes, and you can see there you've got colors, and if you go along, you'll see all the different themes that are there in the induction pack. Okay, so you've got shapes, numbers, classroom objects. I think there's about 30 odd, maybe different themes on the Padlet. Generally, in primary and secondary, they're generally used for students that are coming in new, maybe in a small group, or in a one-to-one if it's possible in terms of support staff to work with a student a couple of times a week, just to build their confidence and to allow them, in a safe environment to learn some of that everyday basic vocabulary that our native English speakers already know, and some of these structures to allow them to start to communicate within the classroom and with their peers. So as I say, there's one for primary and one for secondary, and the beginning of the Padlet kind of explains how to use the pack and how to go. It doesn't. You don't need to cover all the different topics, and in some ways they're not in a specific order, but to be used and maybe to kind of dovetail into the curriculum where possible. Okay. Just giving you a chance if you've stopped the video there and had a wee look at these induction packs. Going back just to the last part of our presentation, so many of you might be working with pupils that are from refugee or asylum-seeking backgrounds, and there are additional pressures and challenges for these groups of pupils. I'm only going to touch on these pressures and challenges today, and sort of signpost you to some additional reading if people feel they would like to have more information working with this group of people. Please get in touch if you feel there's other information you would like to know and that maybe it's not all been answered in our training today. So obviously there's some, for some of our young people that are here, unaccompanied young people, there can be little or there's no family support in Highland actually for them. And for some of our pupils from refugee backgrounds, there's obviously less family support than they would have had in their home country. In terms of their situation, they've had to leave their country through no choice, often leaving family members back in their home country or maybe in other countries taking refuge. In return, as they're new to Scotland, obviously their living situation can be quite challenging, much less support network than they may have had in their home country. Some of our young people and families have had very difficult journeys to get to the UK and to Scotland, and awareness of that and what they've been through. Some of our young people, their legal status is uncertain in terms of their right to be able to stay here in the longer term. Obviously, if we've talked about languages, it will be a barrier, particularly in the initial stages, but not only for some of the young people, but also for their families. And then to be aware of that in terms of how we translate or we give information to these families and making things very accessible, looking at the pupils' access to wider community activities, events, and just being aware that families will not necessarily be aware or be able to access information on what is going on, both to participate in leisure activities, but also for vital information they need to know in terms of health, education. Many of our pupils have come from a very different education system. We heard Ziran speaking earlier about his experience of education in Pakistan and how different that was from Scotland. So again, it's an awareness of that, just in terms of helping students to understand their new environment. It helps if we're aware of what they have come from, and in turn, the cultural differences that are here between their home country and in Scotland. Probably it goes without saying that all our students will have suffered an element of trauma and loss. But from that, they want to be here and they will have more often than not will have an amazing resilience in terms of taking on their new environment and learning within the new school. People, Lambeth Council, which has received a high number of children and young people from a refugee background or asylum-seeking background, have kind of developed this resource, which I felt kind of just, summarises a little bit of what is important. That really, as we said before, the adults are very positive towards the young people in our school, that we try and support them with learning the initial language so they can then communicate with their peers, have access more of what's going on in terms of the class and the wider school community. If we can involve our young people in actually extracurricular activities, it goes a really long way to developing their language skills, forming relationships, which is key, and therefore everything, moves on in a more positive way for them in a school environment. Within the class, as we've talked about, being flexible to teaching and learning, not overemphasizing on assessment, but just giving students time to learn within the school environment and differentiating on language output in the initial stages. Enabling connections with peers, also critical, just giving them opportunities to work in partnerships, looking for opportunities to maybe connect them to people in the school that will be positive relationships for them. And again, that goes a long way in supporting these young people in terms of becoming part of the school community. Just and overall, the last thing, as I said, we probably all our students from a refugee background or asylum seeking background will have suffered an element of trauma and loss in the sense that, they will not be here with the key people in their lives or with all the key people in their lives, but the majority will respond very positive to being nurtured rather than needing one-to-one intervention through health or counselling. Some may, but as I think with the right nurturing approach, many of our young peoples will thrive in their new school. If you're interested in doing further reading, just included some links here on this slide. So please take a look at these, particularly if you're working with a number of refugee pupils in your school. This is a link to our website. So I think I already clicked on that for showing you the Padlet. So all the resources we've talked about today are on the website. Again, please, once we've finished this video, if you want to pause it now, have a look at the website, have a look at the kind of different categories on the website, and just become familiar with the information that is there to support you. Anything you're looking for that you can't find, please get in touch with either myself or Jenny. And if you don't mind, just before we finish, just completing this short exit ticket, just to give us some feedback on what has been useful today, what anything additional you would like to see in training, from the EAL team, would be very grateful if you'd fill in this quick exit ticket. Okay, and that just leaves me to say thank you, okay, from myself, and that's our contact. That's myself, alison.wright@highland.gov.uk, and Jenny Gray. So please get in touch. Any queries that have arisen from this training or something that has arisen in school, please get in touch for advice and signposting to resources. We really appreciate any contact from any members of staff at the school. And thank you for your time today.